Good afternoon, esteemed generals, and welcome to a new episode of Men Around the Führer. Picture this, October 8th, 1884, in the elegant city of Karlsruhe, Germany. A boy is born into privilege, into military aristocracy. His father, Ernst August von Reichenau, is a Prussian lieutenant general. The family name carries weight. The future seems written in iron and tradition. The boy's name is Walter Karl Ernst August von Reichenau, and like many sons of generals, his path seems clear from the cradle. But here's what nobody could have predicted that autumn day. This baby, born into the genteel world of Imperial Germany, would one day become one of the most ruthless architects of genocide in human history. Let me tell you his story, not because he deserves to be remembered with honor, but because we must remember what happens when ambition meets ideology, when military skill serves evil, and when a man chooses darkness over humanity. Young Walter grew up in a world of officers' clubs, military parades, and the rigid codes of Prussian society. On March 14th, 1903, at just 18 years old, he followed his father's footsteps and joined the Prussian army as an artillery officer cadet. Think about that for a moment. 18 years old, stepping into a tradition centuries old. By August 1904, he received his commission in the 1st Guards Field Artillery Regiment. But Walter wasn't just going through the motions. He had ambition, real burning ambition. In May 1914, he entered the Prussian War Academy in Berlin for general staff training. These were the elite of the elite, the officers who would plan wars, not just fight them. Then came August 1914, and everything changed. The Great War exploded across Europe, and Walter's class at the War Academy never got to graduate. Instead, they were sent straight to the Western Front. Walter became adjutant of the 1st Guards Reserve Field Artillery Regiment. Now here's where we see the first glimpses of the man he would become. On the battlefield, Walter von Reichenau showed himself to be efficient, capable, and utterly dedicated. By November 28, 1914, he was promoted to captain. He earned the Iron Cross 2nd Class, then the Iron Cross 1st Class. He wasn't just brave, he was methodical, calculating, effective. He served as a staff officer to Max Hoffmann, worked with the 47th Reserve Division, the 6th Corps, the 7th Cavalry Division. He fought on both the Eastern and Western fronts. When the war ended in 1918, Walter emerged as a captain with an impressive record, but more importantly, he emerged as a survivor in a defeated nation. When Germany collapsed in 1918, Walter von Reichenau was one of the lucky few. The Treaty of Versailles limited the new Reichswehr to just 4,000 officers. Getting one of those positions was like winning a golden ticket, and Walter secured his place. In April 1919, he married Countess Alexandrine von Maltzahn, a Silesian aristocrat from a wealthy landed family. Interestingly, her sister Maria would later become part of the German resistance against the Nazis. But Walter? He would choose a very different path. During this period, something unusual happened. Walter von Reichenau became known as something of an eccentric in the conservative officer corps. He was an avid sportsman, boxing, tennis, swimming, cross-country running. His troops nicknamed him the Sports General. He would jog for miles every day, even in the brutal Russian winter. His other nickname? The Bull. And not just because of his physical fitness, but because of his stubborn, forceful personality. Here's what makes it even stranger. He spoke English at home with his wife. He loved automobile racing. He was progressive in some ways, modern in his thinking about military matters. And despite what would come later, in the 1920s and early 1930s, he actually supported World War I Jewish veterans events, appearing in full military uniform even after Hitler came to power. How do we reconcile this? A man who attended Jewish veterans ceremonies while simultaneously joining the Nazi Party. It's one of history's disturbing contradictions. But here's the thing about Walter von Reichenau. His ambition always came first. Always. He moved up steadily through the ranks. Major in 1924. Lieutenant Colonel in 1929, Colonel in 1932. By 1930, he was Chief of Staff to the Inspector of Signals at the Reichswehr Ministry. This was a man on the rise. And then came April 1932. His uncle, an ardent Nazi, introduced him personally to Adolf Hitler. January 30th, 1933. Hitler becomes Chancellor of Germany, and Walter von Reichenau sees his opportunity. When Werner von Blomberg became Minister of War, Reichenau was appointed head of the ministerial office of the Reichswehr Ministry. Suddenly, he was the chief liaison officer between the German army and the Nazi Party. Think about what that meant. He became the bridge, the connector, the man who helped Hitler gain control of the military. Reichenau joined the Nazi Party, a direct violation of army regulations designed to keep the military out of politics. But rules meant nothing compared to his ambition. He had seen which way the wind was blowing, and he positioned himself perfectly. Together with Blomberg, Reichenau worked to force Kurt Hammerstein-Eckward, an anti-Nazi, to retire as commander-in-chief of the army. They wanted Reichenau himself to take the position. But here's where it gets interesting. President Paul von Hindenburg vetoed the selection after senior officers complained. They didn't trust him. They knew he was too political, too close to the Nazis, too ambitious. General Werner von Fritsch got the job instead. But Reichenau didn't give up. In 1934, he played a crucial role in convincing Hermann Göring and Heinrich Himmler that Ernst Röhm and the SA had to be removed. His advice helped lead to the Night of the Long Knives, that bloody purge in June 1934 when Hitler eliminated his rivals within his own movement. Reichenau was promoted to lieutenant general in 1935 and given command of the army garrison in Munich. In 1938, he nearly became commander-in-chief of the entire German army. Wilhelm Keitel, one of Hitler's advisors, blocked it. Keitel said Reichenau was not thorough enough, not a hard worker, a busybody, too superficial, little loved. Translation: he was in his position because of politics, not pure military merit. But Reichenau was untouchable now. He had Hitler's ear and his favor. September 1st, 1939, Germany invades Poland. World War II begins. Walter von Reichenau commanded the 10th Army in this invasion. And here's a story that reveals his character perfectly. He became the first German soldier to cross the Vistula River. How? He swam it. In full view of his troops, he pushed his clothes ahead of him on a raft and swam across the river. Theatrical? Absolutely. But it made him a legend among his soldiers. For his role in the Polish campaign, he received the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross. His command was redesignated the 6th Army, and in 1940, he led it through Belgium and France with devastating success. The Blitzkrieg rolled on, and Reichenau's 6th Army was at the forefront. On July 19, 1940, Hitler promoted him to General Field Marshal during the famous 1940 Field Marshal ceremony. Walter von Reichenau had reached the pinnacle of military rank. He was 55 years old, wearing his ever-present monocle, and he had the world at his feet. But then came June 22, 1941, Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. Interestingly, Reichenau had been a strong opponent of invading the Soviet Union. He thought it was strategically foolish, but when Hitler ordered it, Reichenau obeyed. Ambition and obedience, they defined him. The 6th Army pushed deep into Ukraine as part of Army Group South. They captured Kiev, Belgorod, Kharkov, Kursk. Militarily, it was a triumph. But behind the advancing troops, something else was happening. Something monstrous. September 19, 1941, the German army occupied Kiev. Between September 20th and 28th, explosives planted by retreating Soviet forces caused extensive damage to the city, destroying German headquarters. The Germans used this as a pretext for what came next. September 26th, a meeting took place. The military governor, General Major Kurt Eberhard, the police commander for Army Group South, SS Obergruppenführer Friedrich Jeckeln, and the Einsatzgruppe C commander Otto Rasch decided to murder every remaining Jew in Kiev. And here's the crucial detail. Walter von Reichenau's 6th Army coordinated with the SS. His soldiers helped plan this massacre. They provided logistics. They secured the perimeter. On September 27th, the propaganda company 637 of the Wehrmacht 6th Army printed 2,000 wall banners. On September 28th, these notices were posted all over Kiev in Russian, Ukrainian, and German. They ordered all Jews to assemble on September 29th at 8 a.m. near the Jewish cemetery. They were told to bring documents, money, valuables, and warm clothing. They were told they were being evacuated. It was a lie. September 29th and 30th, 1941. The massacre at Babi Yar. Let me tell you what happened there, because this is the horror that Walter von Reichenau enabled and encouraged. Thousands upon thousands of Jewish families, mothers, children, elderly people, walked to the ravine at Babi Yar, believing they were going to be resettled. Instead, they were forced to strip naked. They were ordered to lie down in the ravine on top of the bodies of those already murdered. Then, they were shot. For 36 hours, this continued. According to the official report from Einsatzgruppe C, 33,771 Jews were murdered in just 2 days. 33,771 people. And Walter von Reichenau's 6th Army was complicit. His soldiers secured the area. His officers coordinated. Some historians argue that Wehrmacht troops may have even participated directly. But Reichenau wasn't satisfied with mere complicity. He wanted his soldiers to understand their role in this genocidal war. On October 10, 1941, Field Marshal Walter von Reichenau issued what became known as the Severity Order, or the Reichenau Order. This document is one of the most damning pieces of evidence of Wehrmacht involvement in the Holocaust. Let me read you what he wrote to his troops. The most important objective of this campaign against the Jewish Bolshevik system is the complete destruction of its sources of power and the extermination of the Asiatic influence in European civilization. In this Eastern theater, the soldier is not only a man fighting in accordance with the rules of the art of war, but also the ruthless standard-bearer of a national conception. For this reason, the soldier must learn fully to appreciate the necessity for the severe but just retribution that must be meted out to the subhuman species of Jewry. Read that again. Subhuman species of Jewry. Complete destruction. Extermination. This wasn't a rogue SS commander. This was a Wehrmacht field marshal, one of the highest-ranking military officers in Germany, explicitly ordering his troops to participate in genocide. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, Reichenau's superior, expressed complete agreement with the order. He sent it to all other army commanders under his command, urging them to issue similar orders. The Severity Order became a model. But here's an even more chilling detail. The only objection Reichenau ever raised to the Einsatzgruppen killings in his sector was when they were killing Jews so quickly that they were creating ammunition shortages. His solution: he recommended that the SS limit themselves to 2 bullets per Jew. 2 bullets per person. That's how he thought about human beings. In November 1941, Hitler relieved Field Marshal von Rundstedt from command of Army Group South and promoted Reichenau to take his place. Even higher command, even more power. Reichenau personally recommended that Friedrich Paulus, his protégé, take over command of the 6th Army. This is the same 6th Army that would a year later be trapped and destroyed at Stalingrad. But Reichenau wouldn't live to see that. Remember how I mentioned his obsessive fitness routine? On January 14, 1942, in the depths of the brutal Russian winter, Field Marshal Walter von Reichenau went on his usual cross-country run, 6 miles, in temperatures well below -20 degrees Fahrenheit. When he returned to headquarters, he looked ill. He sat down for lunch in the officers' mess, ate a little, signed a few papers, and stood up to leave. Before he reached the door, he collapsed. Stroke. Massive stroke. He never regained consciousness. Hitler immediately ordered that Reichenau be flown back to Germany for treatment by a famous heart surgeon. But the plane carrying him crashed during landing in Lemberg, now Lviv. Whether he died from the stroke or from injuries in the crash, we don't know. He was pronounced dead on arrival in Leipzig on the evening of January 17, 1942. He was 57 years old. Hitler gave him a state funeral. He was buried in the Invalidhof, the German National Cemetery in Berlin, with full military honors. Friedrich Paulus, Reichenau's successor, rescinded both the Severity Order and Hitler's Commissar Order in the 6th Army's sector. Whether that was from conscience or pragmatism, we'll never know. But the damage had been done. Babi Yar continued to be used as an execution site until the Soviets recaptured Kiev in November 1943. Total deaths at Babi Yar? Estimates range from 100,000 to 150,000 people. Jews, Roma, Soviet prisoners of war, and Ukrainian civilians. Because Walter von Reichenau died in 1942, he never faced trial for his crimes. He was never held accountable. At the Nuremberg trials, he was part of the German General Staff and High Command, collectively indicted for war crimes. The Reichenau Order, the Severity Order, was specifically cited as evidence of Wehrmacht complicity in genocide, but there was no trial for Walter von Reichenau personally. No day in court, no judgment, no sentence. So who was Walter von Reichenau? How do we understand this man? He was brilliant in many ways, an innovative military thinker, a modernizer, a physically fit athlete who could outrun men half his age. He was progressive in some aspects of military strategy. He spoke English, loved sports, attended Jewish veterans events in the early 1930s, but he was also a man whose ambition knew no boundaries, no moral limits. He saw the Nazi Party as a vehicle for his career, and he rode it all the way to Field Marshal. He joined a party that violated army regulations because he saw opportunity. He helped orchestrate the Night of the Long Knives because it served his interests. He collaborated with the SS because it pleased his superiors. And when the moment came to choose between humanity and ideology, between decency and obedience, between mercy and murder, Walter von Reichenau chose evil. Not passively, not reluctantly. He chose it actively, enthusiastically. He put it in writing. He made it policy. He encouraged his soldiers to embrace it. The Severity Order wasn't forced on him. Nobody made him write those words about subhuman species. That came from within. That was his choice. His death in January 1942 was almost certainly painless. A stroke, unconsciousness, perhaps some trauma in the crash, and then nothing. Compare that to the deaths of the 33,771 people murdered at Babi Yar in 2 days. Compare it to the suffering of the hundreds of thousands who died because of orders he gave and policies he championed. Walter von Reichenau lived 57 years. He achieved the highest military rank in Nazi Germany. He won medals, commanded armies, shaped history. And he did it all while enabling, encouraging, and ordering genocide. History remembers him now not as the bull or the sports general. History remembers him as what he truly was, one of the architects of the Holocaust, a war criminal who escaped justice only through death. There's a lesson here, I think. Competence without conscience is dangerous. Ambition without morality is destructive. And when talented, capable people choose to serve evil, they can make that evil far more effective, far more organized, far more deadly. Walter von Reichenau wasn't a monster in appearance. He was a decorated officer, an athletic general, a man who seemed modern and progressive in some ways. That's what makes his story so chilling. Evil doesn't always look like evil. Sometimes it wears a monocle and runs 6 miles in the freezing cold and commands armies with skill. And sometimes, the most terrible crimes in human history are committed not despite human capability, but because of it. When talented people place their gifts in service of darkness. That's the story of Walter von Reichenau, a man who chose ambition over humanity, efficiency over mercy, and genocide over conscience. A man who died in his bed instead of facing justice. A man who must never be forgotten. Not to honor him, but to remember what happens when we forget that competence and character are not the same thing, and that following orders is never an excuse for participating in murder.